And thank you everybody who has joined on, and other people will be listening to the recording later. Just as a welcome, this is July 2018's LDS PMA Roundtable, and we're going to be hearing from Janet Perry, and she's going to be talking about Podcast 101, how to go about creating a podcast. What are best practices? What things should you know? What things should you avoid to have a good experience? And so Janet, she has a podcast, goes along with her website, Nonfiction for Life. And it's a great website, kind of featuring books, on true stories, great ideas, things that are inspiring to people. So maybe biographies and memoirs, things on health and wellness, business, home and family, personal development. So a good range of topics that she talks about. And I love that it's just inspiring people in a lot of different areas in their lives. And so with that, I'll let Janet introduce herself a little bit more, and I just want to thank Janet for being willing to lead our roundtable, and I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts. It's not an area that I have ever tried to get into, and so I'm excited to hear your experience. So with that, we'll turn it over to Janet and take it away.
Thank you, Susie. I'll share my screen, and that will do a lot of the talking for me, I hope. Thank you for that nice introduction. Podcasting at this point it's reaching a tipping point. A lot of people know what a podcast is, but it's surprising how many people don't know how to listen to podcasts. They know they're out there, but they just don't know how to listen. And I'm finding that is one of the biggest barriers. It's not, once people find out what they can get out of podcasts, which is basically everything you want to know. There's podcasts, thousands and thousands of podcasts. Then people get really excited. This isn't a podcast about how to do that. This is a podcast about how to start them. And the reason I started a podcast is I love learning, and I always would listen to podcasts whenever I could, when I was cleaning my house or walking, and so I decided to start a podcast. But it's not something you can just say, hey, I have this passion or idea. You need to take a little more time. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, you need to ask yourself why you should start one. I had a huge passion for, and have a huge passion for, books and for reading. And I was an English major when I was younger and loved reading literature. But as I've gotten older, I've become more interested in nonfiction. And so I narrowed the scope of what I thought I wanted to talk about to nonfiction. And then with the help of Steve Persanti, who told me not to boil the ocean, I narrowed it even farther. You may not know that nonfiction actually takes up about 2/3 of all the books, but not 2/3 of the conversation that's out there about books. And so I had to choose among all that 2/3 of the books that are out there, which ones I would feature. So that helped a lot. But anyway, this passion of mine is why I started the podcast, but it takes more than that to make it work. You have to have the passion, and you have to have an idea of how you're going to turn that passion into something that is packaged so people will want to listen to it. And then the third thing you have to have, absolutely have to have, is time. This has taken so much time. This is almost like a full-time job for me. And that's why the passion is important, because if you don't have passion, it's not that fun. You know, you're going to be heads down in your podcast, at least in the initial stages, just learning how to do it. And then later, where I spend my time now is promoting it and talking to a lot of people and doing events like this and so forth. So make sure you have all three of these things. I want to talk about the middle piece, though, the idea. How can you test your idea? I read this book by Pat Flynn called Will It Fly, and took a lot of time going through the exercises in the book so that I knew that the idea had some sticking power. And I just recommend that to you, to a podcast. He's happens to be a podcaster, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. This is good for any business idea. So I would really recommend, before jumping in, that you take time to get a 360 on your idea. Any questions so far? Can anyone hear me?
Sounds good. No questions.
Okay.
I do know Pat Flynn's podcast, so it's cool.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going then. Thanks. Okay, where do you learn how to podcast? Well, we live in this digital age where you can learn to podcast online. There are so many resources out there, but I'm going to share 3 that might help you, at least for starting points. One is Cliff Ravenscraft. He calls himself the podcast answer man. He has podcasts about podcasting, so you can learn from him, and he has a website. The Audacity to Podcast is put together by Daniel J. Lewis, and you'll find that these kind of early on, the ones who started podcasting early on are friends, and so they refer to each other. I wouldn't say they're necessarily the best, but they have good basic content. You need to find someone who resonates with you, whose style you like. And I really liked Pat Flynn. He does a podcast that just worked for me. They were modules that were nicely packaged and divided, so I could learn something and stop, absorb before going on to the next podcast and tutorial. So you just need to find someone who works for you. And I can't tell you all the details because there's so many steps, but they can. You go to their websites and podcasts, you can learn a lot. I'm not trying to avoid telling you what to do, but there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff that's technical that would make this a very boring webinar. But hopefully by turning to them and then other online sites that you would happen to find, you'll find what you need. What equipment do you need? It can be as simple as your iPhone or a hand recording device, which costs about $20, and then an editing program. I use GarageBand, so you import it into GarageBand, and then you have to edit from there. A lot of people use Audacity, which is how Daniel J. Lewis came up with that name, the Audacity to Podcast, because Audacity was one of the early editing programs for podcasting. So you'll hear that as an option. I happen to have a Mac, so I use GarageBand, and now I actually outsource my editing, so I can have more time to create content. How much should you invest? Now, I had an interesting experience when I was listening to Cliff Ravenscraft. He said I needed all kinds of expensive equipment, and then my son-in-law, who's technical, said, you were kind of taken. You don't need all this. And he had started out in his college career as an audio, I don't even know what you call it, but he was in audio training, and he helped me scale back the equipment to a really good microphone. This is a Behringer B2 Pro, and then a good little mixer, which is what you see in the middle, and that's also a Behringer product. And then you connect these to your computer, and away you go. Now, I just want to step back for a minute. There are people who like to podcast in one program and then put it into GarageBand. I learned to do it right in GarageBand. And what that means is if you're not familiar with GarageBand, as you're recording, you can see the sound waves moving, the audio waves moving, and modulate them using this middle piece, which is the mixer. And some people just don't like that. They just want to completely focus on the interview or whatever they're doing and then think about the editing later. So that's just something to know. As far as the investment goes, the original recommendation from Cliff Ravenscraft was somewhere near like $2,000. And this probably, other than my computer, which I already had, the other equipment I have purchased with cords, and now I have a little splitter, probably $250. So it is an investment. But I think a good microphone is probably your most important piece. And then what I don't have on here is a little pop filter. You pop on the top of the microphone to soften your P's and your B's, and that's important too. And that costs like, I don't know, $4 or something, but that's important. Any questions so far? Okay. So what skills do you need to podcast? Okay, a lot of technical skills, more than you might think. And that for me has been the most challenging part of podcasting, because I've had a lot of breakdowns with the podcast sound waves just not working out one time, and the next time it'll work fine. And so I've had a lot of tense moments. I keep hoping I'm through the worst. I think I've sort of figured it out. Tomorrow will be my 51st episode, so I should have stopped having trouble after about 8, but I've had them into the 30s. And my daughter said, "Mom, I just would have given up." But I love it so much that I guess that's why I haven't given up. If you don't enjoy technology, or you're not willing to learn technology, or you don't have time to deal with the technology, then I would suggest you hire another person to handle it. The only caveat with that, though, is you may have a problem right in the moment of podcasting. This has happened to me many times, and I've had to call my son-in-law at work and say, "Can you help me? This isn't working, and they're coming on in 2 minutes." So you need to have somebody who's available if you have those kind of troubles. Otherwise, the technology can just be maybe your audio editor. And I have a really great guy who does it for me. He's a college student, and his schedule is flexible enough where, I can send it to him and he can do it, at his convenience. But he's just been terrific.
Janet?
Yeah.
Question for you. How did you find him?
How did I find my audio editor?
The college students. Did you already have connection to him, or did you post it somewhere?
That's a great question. If you look at any of the show notes that I have, you can find a link to him and email him. He'd probably like more work. He is a friend of mine in our state here in California, and his brother does it professionally, but I couldn't afford his brother, and so I worked out something with his name is Andrew Olson, and I worked out something with him which was more affordable for me, especially since I'm not monetized yet. So everything that I do for my podcast just comes out of my pocket still. And so it's, there's that investment, a one-time investment for CapEx for your equipment. And then you have these recurring costs like audio editing. And for me, it's totally worth it. And he and I have a great relationship, and he's handled some really tough ones. And then I love it when I kind of give him a softball and say, I send him the notes. Sometimes I'll take notes if I'm really kind of concerned about how it's going to go out. I'll make notes at each time interval where I want him to take a look at it, or I'll say cut here, restart here. So I do that work for him, and then he packages it up. And sometimes, just recently, he missed something, and I've started time stamping my show notes so people can just look at the timestamp and say, oh, at minute 18:15, she's talking about this. So I've started experimenting with that, and he missed something. There was a duplicate, and I didn't know it until I was re-listening to the edited podcast. But for the most part, I shouldn't even tell you about that, because he's terrific. So finding somebody, in fact, Susie, maybe this is something that LDSPMA needs to think about, including like reaching out to people who are audio editors, because, podcasting is becoming part of that media.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Thank you.
That was probably too long of an answer, but you can find them in my show notes. That's all.
Janet, I've got a question as well.
Sure. Who's this?
So this is Barry.
Hi, Barry.
You mentioned that you've got audio stamps on your, are you doing transcripts of your podcasts?
I'm not doing transcripts. I go through the edited podcast and I write up the show notes with small snippets at each interval that I think is kind of a key point in the podcast. Okay. You can do transcripts. Some people do that. And I know there's programs for that. I kind of felt like, well, why would they want to listen to the podcast if I have the entire transcript? It felt sort of redundant to me and maybe counterproductive to trying to get people to listen to the podcast. Mm-hmm. So that's how I.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Because I'm one that I read a lot faster than I listen. And so if there is a transcript, I'll tend to read the transcript. And
you could read my show notes in a hurry and get the gist of everything. You'll miss the flavor of the person and the interplay of me interviewing. But I like to know what I'm getting into too, because listening to a podcast is an investment of time. And some people can't do that. So.
And yet it's such a different experience. It's like when I will watch a BYU devotional or listen to it versus read again, they're great to read, but it's a whole different experience to watch it, especially when they've got slides. It's a whole different experience.
Right, so. And they refer to the slide and you can't see it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think content is being pushed out in so many different ways now. Mm-hmm. So people are trying to get the content they want, and I try to make it easy on them. I used to do my show notes by sharing just 3 things. That's sort of a catch word I use at Nonfiction for Life. If any of you have followed me on Instagram, just yesterday was Paperback Book Day. And I shared just 3 books. And then with each book, I shared just 3 things about the book, because I don't like to review the book. I know that sounds weird. We do review the books, but I think of it more as featuring a book and then letting the readers decide if they want to read it. So that's how I used to write my show notes, just with just 3 things about the podcast. And then, and that's how I do my blogs. But with the podcast, I decided I wanted to help the readers a little bit, or the listeners a little bit more, know what they were getting.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Okay. What else do you need? You need to be able to use your voice well and understand how to use a microphone. And just tomorrow, I will have a podcast with a storyteller. And he's won the Moth podcast, or the Moth Storytelling Grand Slam 6 times. And the other one, I think 35 times. He's an onstage storyteller, but he's also a 5th grade teacher. So he has this kind of interesting life. And he said, the one thing you need to do if you're a storyteller is you have to learn how to use the mic, and you put it right up to your mouth. And that's kind of scary to people. So just play around with a mic. And like I said, get a good mic. I think that those 2 things, technology and voice, are some of the important things, but you'll find with the rest of the list I have here, they're not the most important. Because people aren't as picky about quality anymore. They're picky about content. Mm-hmm. So to make the content keep happening for you, you're going to need courage. In my case, I have to reach out to people constantly. I reached out to Condoleezza Rice last week to see if she would be on my podcast, which she said no, so I get turned down, but that's okay. You have to have courage to keep going forward when you have troubles, whether they're technical or otherwise. You have to have enthusiasm, and that goes back to the passion that I explained at the beginning. I still feel, if not as excited, more excited about my podcast, because I'm getting feedback from people saying, this has been so helpful. This book was so great for our school district, or this helped me in my parenting. So keep that enthusiasm going. I would really check yourself. If you don't feel enthusiastic about it and it's a drag for you, you probably need to stop that particular podcast and move on to another one, or try something different altogether. You need to have curiosity. The world is changing a lot. And so the podcasting world it's such an exciting place to be, because there's it still hasn't quite become mainstream. And so you want to be curious about what's happening and how you can improve your podcast, how you can meet other people. I just learned recently, I attended a virtual podcast summit and listened to some of the top podcasters in the nation. And I just learned that a lot of podcasters are introverts. I'm a total extrovert. So I found that so interesting. You don't have to be an extrovert to be a podcaster. You can sit in your own little room and be completely happy sharing and talking and comfortable doing that. You need to have determination. Like I said, I had so many technical problems, but I was determined to go forward because of that passion. And then persistence is similar to determination. Have some goals out there in front of you so you know what you're shooting for. This month, I've been doing this since last fall. I went live with the podcast last September, and it's slow growing. And just this month, I passed the 1,000 download mark, and that has been a goal for me. So I like seeing my statistics go up. I mean, you'll meet podcasters who have 5,000 downloads a month. I'm not a big deal at this point, but I've seen growth, and that's what excites me. I know that people are listening to these podcasts, and part of that is a function of awareness growing, and part of it is now I have content, so they can go back and listen to a lot of other podcasts. So that persistence going forward is paying off. How do you share it? You have to have a media hosting site, and this is the part that was really confusing to me. I knew that I needed to hire a site that would hold these files that were really big, and that's called a media hosting site. I chose Libsyn. There's Blueberry, Libsyn. Those are kind of the two big ones. I just went with when I read the agreement and other people's comments, that one seemed to work for me. And I just want to pause right here. One thing that it's a solitary, in my case anyway, because I'm the only podcaster host on my program. It's a bit of a solitary experience. And so I joined some Facebook groups for podcasters so I could ask questions, and that has helped me a lot. So not a ton, not as much as I was hoping, but it still helped me kind of, if I had a question, I needed at least a nudge in the right direction. That helped me a lot. And a lot of those people recommended Libsyn. You need a hosting site for all these huge files before you can put it on iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, all these. And then when we did that at Nonfiction for Life, then we told everybody. And the first one to go with, of course, is the big kahuna, iTunes. You need to submit to iTunes, and they'll ask for, and this is where Pat Flynn came in really handy. He talked me through every step of creating an RSS feed, and then I could put it into the form that iTunes was asking for. And that's the part that I just didn't really enjoy. But I knew that I had to go through those necessary steps in order to have a podcast. So you may find you may be feeling like you have this great idea, you want to talk about it, you want to share it with the world in a podcast, but there are just, necessary evils. For some people, they love that kind of thing. And there's a podcaster I listened to who said, I just find I really enjoy editing. That's just the fun part for me. For me, no, thank you. I want to talk to authors. I want to read books, So I know a little bit how to do it, but it's not my cup of tea. And then after you need to have, to look legitimate when you start, when you launch your podcast in iTunes and all the other podcast outlets, you need to probably have at least 3 episodes. Then you look like you're happening. But if you just put 1 down, then people are kind of sketchy. They're like, I'm not sure I want to listen to this. This doesn't look like it's going to have holding power. So have 3. I ended up having 5, but that's neither here nor there. But once you've submitted to iTunes, it's not so hard to submit to all the others. You kind of know the drill. But you want to get on all of them that you can as quickly as you can, and then tell all your all your followers. Your followers may not have an iPhone. They may have an Android. And so I talked to my friends who had Androids and asked them, where do you listen to your podcasts? And so I went through that process of trying to include them in the process of, be part of this podcast with me, please. And I want you to get this information, and where is it going to be easiest for you? Any questions at this point before I go on?
Yeah, this is Barry, and I need to jump off, Janet, in a couple minutes. I have another call.
Okay.
But you mentioned about monetizing. It's not something you've done yet. What are your thoughts or plans to do that?
Okay. Well, most people think of doing having sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I needed to have some more downloads per month, because it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. Sponsors don't want to use you if you don't have enough downloads anyway. So that's one way to do it. You can approach sponsors. If you're big, if you happen to get this fabulous idea and you go big, sponsors will start coming to you. However, in this podcast summit I recently attended, they address people like me who don't have a huge following yet or a huge number of downloads. They said, reach out to your listeners and talk to them one-on-one. The biggest podcaster probably is, his name is John Lee Dumas, JLD, and he does Entrepreneurs on Fire. And he said at first what he did was just talk to people one-on-one who were listening and ask them what they wanted. And then he created these workbooks or something like that, journals or something that he sells for $39 that are actually add value to the people who listen to his podcast. So I'm looking at doing something like that right now, where I can provide value for people who are in book groups or just listeners. And so I've already started that process.
Oh, great.
Any other questions? I'm trying to talk really fast because you have to go.
No, it's fine. That's a great model, because it's almost like an online learning experience that people are having if they've got a journal or some kind of thing that they can follow along with.
Yeah. I mean, top 10 lists that you provide just for your listeners who are on your email list, that kind of thing. That's kind of where I'm moving right now. I'd love to have a sponsor, and I have some really good sponsors I haven't wanted to sell out, so to speak, with sponsors. I didn't want to advertise leggings or something that has nothing to do with books. So I'm kind of particular about that. But I do have some sponsors that I want to approach that I think would be a perfect match for my particular podcast. So, and I did at the beginning. Do you have any other questions, Barry, or should I go on?
Keep going. I'm going to jump off, but thank you for this, Jan.
You bet. I didn't realize I was going to have to create a website, but it became more and more clear as I was developing this podcast and trying to talk to authors that I needed a website to show that I was legitimate. And so this has been a really great thing to have. And I had to hire somebody to make the website, but we used a WordPress site. I want to redesign it now and so forth, but having a website is a place where I can put the podcast for people who have a hard time figuring out how to subscribe to podcasts. I can say, just go to nonfictionforlife.com and you'll see the podcast right there. So the media files sit in my website as well. For finding authors, it really has been good, because they look at the website and they say, oh, she's legitimate. This is good stuff. And they can also see that there are some pretty cool authors that they'll be a part of. And that just helps too in convincing them to be on the program. Now, social media, this could be a long topic, but this is actually my last slide, I think. So if you don't have a social media presence, you're going to have to rely on word of mouth, which is the old way of doing things. And you may have a great network of friends, but it's going to take longer. So we started off on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And just recently, in the last month, I launched a YouTube channel. And I did that because I wanted to have a presence there. And I have some friends one of my very best friends is deaf, and she cannot listen to the podcast. And she's gone deaf over the years. And so she knows what it's like to enjoy audio, and now she can't. And And so on YouTube, they have a closed captioning feature. So you can put your podcast there, and then the closed captioning feature will take care of the transcription of the podcast. I've also I found this cool program called Spare Min. So it's one word, capital M in the middle, Spare Min, and you can turn audio files into a video. And so that can go on YouTube as well. So what I'm in the process of doing is going through all the podcasts and taking a minute or less from each podcast. And there's a reason for the minute or less. Do you guys know that on Instagram you can only have 1 minute or less of video? That's why. So I put a snippet, or what I call a tidbit, from the podcast. And then people can listen to 1 minute from the podcast and decide, that doesn't really interest me, or that sounds so fascinating, I want to listen to the whole thing. And so now I have a presence on YouTube as well. And I'm starting to do more videos, like I mentioned at the beginning. Yesterday I did 4 videos, actually. One kicking off paperback book day, and then doing a short video of each of the 3 books that I promoted. I haven't put those on YouTube yet, but that's the kind of thing I envision doing for people, so that there's more ways to grab the content in the way that they want to grab it. Anyway, so any questions on social media? Because that's a really big part of podcasting, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's great.
Yeah, and this is another area where I was really fortunate at the beginning, towards the beginning, not at the very, very beginning, but towards the beginning. My daughter agreed to handle all my social media, and she makes beautiful, I think they're gorgeous graphics. She makes really nice graphics. Every week on Monday, we put out a quote from the book and say, check out the podcast, it's coming Wednesday. And she's really creative and puts these quotes into pictures that are fun. And then she has done all the posting on Wednesdays and so forth. And so her kids are growing and she's getting a little busier. So now she only does the graphics, and I have to do all the tagging and posting. And it's just, I've learned a lot, and I'm glad I've learned it. But again, it's kind of like editing the podcast. For me, I would prefer to spend more time creating content and having somebody else do the post. But I'm just not at that point yet where I can turn it over to somebody else. So I think it's really important. At least you should be on one social media channel so people can find you outside of your podcast. Any questions on that? Actually, I think that's it. I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So if you only had one social media outlet, which one's your favorite? Which one do you recommend?
I've had the least amount of traction on Twitter. Twitter is, someone has described it as a river. You dip in and out, and if you dip in one point and then pull out, people will miss it later. Facebook and Instagram have different demographics. So Facebook tends to be older people now, and Instagram is younger people. The nice thing about Facebook is it's much easier to post and edit. Instagram kind of requires you do it right from your phone, which is hard when you're trying to edit. I don't know. I just find it more clunky. I think that the page itself, though, once you have an account and you have a lot of graphics day after, post after post, it looks really cool and you get a nice sense of the brand. And there are limitations for each, but Instagram, like I said, has a 1 minute limitation on videos. And so you have to just think, what is it I'm going to post there? Am I going to post a lot of graphics, or am I going to post audio and video? Am I going to be like present with my listeners? I've just now started not coming out, but taking pictures, videos of myself. We went live last week at live stream I did with one of the authors. It was really fun. I've started a nonfiction book group at my local library, and one of the authors agreed to come and do a live stream with us so people could ask him questions. And so with that, I did a lot, I introduced it and put it on Instagram really quickly. So there's that live feature. I sometimes wonder what is going on at Instagram and Facebook, because I feel like if it's from the same company, they should make both equally easy. But for me, that isn't the case yet. So I again, get back to your question, I'd consider the demographics. I'd consider your skills. If you're really good at Instagram already, I'd start there. I was really good at Facebook because I'd been doing it for years. I mean, really good meaning really comfortable with it. And so that's always been an easier place for me to post, edit, add, reach out. So the one problem, I'll tell you this, the one problem with both of them is you have to have a following. So on Facebook, yesterday I accidentally posted this montage of book covers and videos that I did of the 3 different books under my personal account. I got a lot of people commenting, whereas I meant to put it on the Nonfiction for Life Facebook page, and I just don't have as many followers. I don't, friends following my Facebook page. And so that was kind of an aha for me, that maybe I should share my nonfiction posts on my personal account. It's hard to get people to like a Facebook page because it's a commitment for them. They're going to see more in their feed. And I think people are kind of picky about that. Whereas with Instagram, I just scroll through really, I don't know, it just feels people like to follow and they don't mind just whipping right past a post. That's how it feels to me. Maybe you could help me understand it better.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I honestly haven't been on Instagram, but I'm figuring I'm going to need to get on it at some point.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a podcast?
No, I don't. But I've listened to podcasts, and I always thought it sounded like an interesting thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I thought this would be interesting to learn about.
Yeah. Well,
Good.
thank you. I'm glad you're interested, and you need other podcasters here and there to help. I had to reach out to one of my authors, actually, helped me get connected to a podcaster friend of his that helped what I call just push me over the finish line. I had everything in place. I was on Libsyn, and I just couldn't figure out how to quite connect it with, now I'm live on iTunes. So stay connected if you do a podcast. Anything else, or questions, or things you wish you would have learned today that I didn't talk about? Maybe I have more to share if you have more questions.
This is Susie. I think all the content you've shared is great. I'm wondering, would you mind sending me your PowerPoint presentation that we could post?
Oh, not at all. I'd be happy to.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. And is it Katie's? The other one listening?
Yes. I'm trying to think of questions. I think I've learned a lot. You've given us a lot of information, so I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, I guess the one thing I'd wrap up with is, do not be surprised at how much time it takes. I tried to emphasize that at the beginning. It really takes a lot of time if you're going to do it well. It's not like you get to just sit in this room and, put something out and then expect a lot of people to listen to it. I spend many, many, many hours making sure that it's quality content, because I know that if people are choosing to listen to me, that means they're choosing to not listen to thousands of other things. And so I really work hard to make it quality. And I think that you want to be proud of what you do, and it keeps your enthusiasm going if you put the time in. Then you know that you can recommend it well. So just plan on a lot of time and make sure that it's time you want to spend doing something that you love. So,
Janet, just going along with that, I have a friend who started a podcast, probably several months ago, and he said that he and his I guess, co-podcaster.
Like a co-host.
Yeah, co-hosts. They will record 2 sessions in a row, and just so that they're more efficient with their time, since they're already getting ready, having a podcast, they realize, hey, let's just do one, and then we record another one right after. And so they're kind of chunking the work, and that's worked for them and been a way to make their time more effective.
Yeah. Again, that's driven by the content. So they probably just talk to each other. I'm driven by appointments I can make with authors. And so, but I'm glad you brought that up, because it does really help to get ahead in the schedule. There's much less panic. You can put out better posts on social media if you have some time to think about it. So yeah, chunking is great. That's the ideal thing, is to be ahead and then make sure your content's really good when you do put it out. So yeah, great.
Okay, well, Katie, any other questions that you have?
I think I understand this, but just to clarify, so when you were talking about putting your files on Libsyn, so that's a separate hosting site that holds the files. So I don't know, I guess I always sort of envisioned that if you submit it to iTunes, then iTunes held it, but you're saying that's not the case. It has to live on Libsyn, and then iTunes basically subscribes to it, and then
Correct. They get your RSS feed, and then as people subscribe, they populate your podcast.
Okay.
So yes, you're correct. So they imagine them kind of in this holding place where there's all this storage. That's Libsyn, and then every time you publish, then iTunes will have it show up in your feed.
Okay. All right. Makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that, Susie, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about podcasting. It's something I'm obviously very passionate about. So thank you.
Yeah, Janet, thank you so very much. I really appreciate the information that you shared. Like I said, I really don't know anything about podcasts, so it's really great to get this intro look and see what is involved. And thank you again for all your preparation for the roundtable today. And really appreciate all your contributions to LDS-PMA in general. So with that, we'll close for today. And I hope you'll all join us for next month's roundtable, and we'll send out an email with details on that one.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Janet.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You are really passionate about this and really enjoy it, so that's great.
Well, I appreciate both of you listening, and I hope others will maybe get it when it's like podcasts, the good thing is this will live somewhere else where people who didn't have time to be here today can join and learn some things, I hope. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.